Believe it or not, the more you try to control how a woman sees you, the faster she loses interest in you. And most men never understand this, because everything they've been taught tells them to do the exact opposite. They think attraction is built by effort, by saying the right things, by proving themselves, by showing consistency, by being predictable, by being good. But what they don't realize is that the moment a woman feels like she has fully figured you out, the moment she feels like your attention is guaranteed, something inside her quietly switches off. It doesn't happen loudly. There's no warning. One day she's engaged, responsive, curious. The next day, something feels different. Her replies are shorter. Her energy is colder. Her attention shifts. And you sit there confused, replaying everything you did, wondering what went wrong. But what went wrong is simple. You became controllable. And controllable men are safe. And safe men are predictable. And predictable men are forgotten. This is the part nobody tells you. Women are not drawn to chaos, but they are deeply affected by emotional uncertainty. Not confusion, not toxicity, but a subtle tension they cannot fully resolve. A man who is present, but not easily read. A man who is calm, but not easily influenced. A man who listens, but does not react the way she expects. That is where attraction begins to grow, because attraction is not built on comfort alone. It is built on tension, and tension only exists when there is something unknown, something not fully in her control. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When you can remain calm and unreactive, when you can listen without being influenced, you are exercising the kind of self-control that creates attraction. Not because you're trying to impress her, but because you're not easy to move. Most men destroy this without realizing it. They over-explain. They overshare. They respond too quickly. They reveal everything too early. They try to remove all uncertainty, thinking it will make her feel secure. But what it actually does is remove the emotional spark that made her interested in the first place. You have to understand this clearly. A woman doesn't fall for a man she completely controls. She may stay with him, she may rely on him, but she will not feel that deep pull toward him, that curiosity, that emotional investment, because there is nothing left to discover, and the human mind, especially when it comes to attraction, is drawn to what it cannot fully possess. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts are consumed by trying to control her perception, your soul reflects that. You become anxious, reactive, and easily manipulated. But when you release that attachment, when you focus on your own center, you become someone she cannot fully predict. And that unpredictability is what keeps her engaged. This is why you've seen it before. The man who doesn't try as hard somehow gets more attention. The man who is not always available somehow becomes more valuable. The man who is calm under pressure somehow feels more powerful. It's not luck. It's not looks. It's not even effort. It's control. Or more accurately, the lack of it. When a woman realizes she cannot easily control your emotions, your reactions, or your direction, she begins to pay attention in a different way. Not because she wants control in a negative sense, but because human nature is wired to explore what it does not fully understand. And that's where most men fail. They think attraction is about being liked. But being liked is not the same as being desired. Being liked comes from predictability. Being desired comes from mystery. And mystery does not mean playing games. It does not mean being distant or cold for no reason. It means having a level of inner stability that is not easily shaken. A presence that is not dependent on her validation. A mindset that does not revolve around her reactions. Because the moment your behavior starts changing based on her mood, you've already lost your frame. Think about it. If she pulls away and you immediately chase, what does that communicate? It tells her that your emotional state depends on her, that your focus shifts based on her attention, that she has control over your internal world. And once that control is felt, the dynamic changes. But when she pulls away, and you remain grounded, unaffected, focused on your own path, something else happens. she begins to feel the shift. Not because you're trying to create distance, but because your center of gravity is not her. And that is rare. Most men orbit around women. Their decisions, their moods, their energy, all influenced by how she responds. But a man who is centered within himself, who does not need to react, who does not rush to fix every emotional fluctuation, becomes something different in her eyes. He becomes unpredictable in a controlled way, not chaotic, not unstable, but not easily managed either. And that's where attraction deepens, because what she cannot control, she begins to feel more strongly. Not because she wants to dominate it, but because it challenges her perception. It creates emotional engagement. It forces her to think, to analyze, to invest. And investment is what builds attachment. You see, people don't value what is easily available. They value what requires attention, what requires effort, what requires understanding. And when you make yourself too easy to understand, too easy to predict, too easy to access, you remove the very elements that create emotional investment. This is why over-texting kills attraction. Not because communication is bad, but because constant availability removes anticipation. There is no space for her to think about you, no gap for her mind to fill, no reason for curiosity to grow. Everything is given, nothing is discovered. And discovery is what fuels desire. When she doesn't fully know what you're thinking, when she can't predict exactly how you'll respond, when your attention is present but not guaranteed, her mind stays engaged. Not because you're manipulating her, but because you're not overextending yourself. There's a difference. One comes from insecurity, the other comes from control. And control, in this context, is not about controlling her. It's about controlling yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your need for validation. Because the truth is, most men are not rejected because they're not good enough. They're rejected because they become too easy to manage. They give too much too soon. They adjust too quickly. They lose their center trying to gain approval. And in doing so, they remove the very thing that made them attractive. The moment she feels like she understands you completely, like there's nothing left beneath the surface, like your behavior is entirely predictable, the emotional tension fades. And without tension, attraction cannot survive. This doesn't mean you become distant. It doesn't mean you become silent or withdrawn. It means you stop trying to control the outcome. Because ironically, the more you try to control how she feels about you, the more control she has over you. And the more control she has over you, the less she feels for you. That's the paradox most men never escape. They think effort equals attraction. But attraction responds to something deeper, something less visible, something that cannot be forced. It responds to presence, to self-containment, to a man who is not easily moved. Because when you are not easily moved, you become something she cannot easily categorize. And what cannot be categorized becomes interesting. What becomes interesting becomes engaging. And what becomes engaging becomes emotional. This is not about manipulation. It's about understanding dynamics that most people ignore. Because attraction is not logical. It's psychological. And psychology does not respond to effort the way you think it does. It responds to contrast. Calm in the face of tension, silence in the face of noise, stillness in the face of emotion. That contrast is what creates presence, and presence is what creates impact. Most men talk too much, explain too much, react too quickly. They try to fill every silence, solve every problem, respond to every message immediately. And in doing so, they remove the space where attraction lives, because attraction grows in the space between interactions, in the moments where she wonders what you're doing, in the gaps where she doesn't fully understand your thoughts, in the silence where your presence lingers without explanation. But if you're always there, always explaining, always reacting, there is no space left. And without space, there is no growth. This is why the man who is slightly out of reach, not physically, but mentally, becomes more compelling. Not because he's unavailable, but because he's not dependent. There's a difference. Dependency creates pressure. Independence creates freedom. And freedom is attractive. Because it signals strength, stability, self-sufficiency. It tells her that your life is not built around her reactions, that your direction does not shift based on her attention, that your identity is not something she can influence easily. And that is what makes you difficult to control. And what is difficult to control becomes valuable. Because value is not just about what you give. It's about what cannot be easily taken. And when your time, your energy, your attention are not easily accessible, they become more meaningful. Not because you're withholding, but because you're selective. And selectivity signals standards. Standards signal self-respect. And self-respect is one of the strongest attraction triggers there is. Because when you respect yourself, you don't overextend. You don't over-explain. You don't chase validation. You remain steady. And that steadiness is what creates emotional grounding. But grounding does not mean predictability. It means consistency in who you are, not in how you react. And that distinction is everything. Because a man who is consistent in his values, but not predictable in his reactions, creates a dynamic that keeps attention without losing respect. He is stable, but not boring. Present, but not overwhelming. Engaged, but not dependent. And that balance is rare. Most men lean too far in one direction, either too distant or too available, too cold or too reactive. But the man who understands this dynamic operates differently. He doesn't try to control how she feels. He controls how he shows up. And that changes everything. Because when you stop trying to manage her perception, you start strengthening your presence. And presence is what she feels. Not your words, not your explanations, not your efforts, your presence. And presence cannot be faked. It comes from internal control, from not reacting impulsively, from not seeking approval, from not adjusting your behavior based on external validation. Because the moment you do that, you lose the one thing that made you stand out, your center. And without a center, you become easy to control. And when you become easy to control, you become easy to forget. If this content is hitting home for you, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more men discover these truths about attraction and self-mastery. Now, let's continue. There is a fundamental truth about attraction that most men never learn. It has nothing to do with the right pickup line or the perfect date. It has to do with the relationship you have with yourself. When a man is desperate for approval, he signals that he doesn't have a solid internal foundation. And that signal is received loud and clear, even if it's never spoken aloud. The woman may not consciously think, he lacks self-worth, but she feels it. She feels it in the way he speaks too quickly, in the way he agrees too easily, in the way he laughs too hard at her jokes, in the way he is always available, always ready, always waiting for her to give him something. And that feeling, it pushes her away. Not because she's cruel, but because she's wired to be drawn to strength. And when a man is constantly seeking her validation, he is not showing strength, he is showing need. And need, when it is too visible, repels. This is where the Stoic concept of amor fati becomes relevant. Love of fate. The acceptance that what will be, and that your peace does not depend on the outcome. When you embrace this mindset, you stop clinging to outcomes. You stop trying to force a specific response. You stop needing her to feel a certain way about you. And in that space, you become free. And freedom, as paradoxical as it may sound, is what makes her want to stay close. Because she knows that you are not a prisoner of her approval, that you can walk away, that you can be okay without her, that you are choosing her, not because you need her, but because you want her. And that is a completely different energy. It is the energy of a man who knows his value. And a man who knows his value is a man who cannot be easily controlled. Think about the men you know who are naturally magnetic. What do they have in common? They don't try to impress. They don't try to prove themselves. They simply are. They have a presence that is solid, a calm that is steady, a confidence that is not loud, but felt. That confidence comes from one place. They have done the work. They have built a life that has meaning. They have developed skills. They have cultivated interests. They have faced adversity and come out stronger. They have a relationship with themselves that is unshakable because it is not based on what others think. It is based on what they know to be true about themselves. And that internal truth is what others detect. It is what women are drawn to. It is what makes a man unforgettable. Most men spend their entire lives trying to become what they think women want. They change their behavior, their words, even their opinions, hoping to fit a mold. But the moment you do that, you lose the one thing that makes you unique, yourself. And when you lose yourself, you become interchangeable. You become just another man who is trying too hard. And when a woman sees that, she doesn't feel attraction. She feels nothing, because there is nothing there to feel. But when you are yourself, unapologetically, consistently, without needing permission, you become something else. You become a man who is not trying to be chosen, but who is choosing. And that is where the power lies. Not in the ability to attract, but in the ability to choose. Because when you are choosing, you are not dependent. And when you are not dependent, you are free. And freedom, more than anything, is what makes you valuable. This is the great paradox of attraction. The less you need someone, the more they want you. The less you try, the more you succeed. The less you reveal, the more they want to discover. It is counterintuitive, and yet it is one of the most consistent patterns in human psychology. It is why the bad boy is so often pursued. Not because he is bad, but because he is unpredictable. Not because he is cruel, but because he is hard to read. Not because he is indifferent, but because he is not desperate. And while you don't need to become a bad boy to attract women, you do need to understand the principle behind it. You need to understand that being too available, too predictable, too easy is not a path to desire. It is a path to indifference. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus also taught, "No great thing is created suddenly." This applies to the process of becoming a man who is not easily controlled. It is not something you can fake overnight. It is built over time, through consistency, through self-awareness, through the willingness to sit with discomfort rather than running from it. It is built every time you choose not to react when you want to, every time you choose to stay grounded when you feel anxious, every time you choose to be present rather than performing. And as you build this internal strength, it becomes visible. Not because you try to show it, but because you cannot hide it. It becomes part of your presence. And that presence is what will attract women without you having to say a word. So, start with yourself. Not with the next message you send, or the next date you plan, or the next attempt to impress. Start with the relationship you have with yourself. Are you someone you respect? Are you someone you would want to be around? Are you someone who is whole on your own? Because if the answer is no, no amount of strategy will fill that gap. But if the answer is yes, you will not need to chase. You will simply be, and she will come to you. And that, in the end, is the only way attraction ever really works. Not through effort, but through presence. Not through trying, but through being. Not through seeking, but through having. And when you have that, you have everything you need. You have the center that cannot be shaken, the presence that cannot be ignored, the value that cannot be denied. And that is the man she will choose. Not because you tried to make her choose you, but because you made yourself impossible to ignore. And remember, the more you try to control how she feels about you, the more control she has over you. And the more control she has over you, the less she feels for you. Focus on building a life worth living for its own sake. Develop such a solid relationship with yourself that you no longer need anyone else to complete it. When you have that, everything else changes. See you in the next one.